Yeah, let's get going. So, first of all, thank you guys very much. This is a Cyber Bulls podcast that we do every week. And today we have a special guest bull. His name is Chris Camillo. And so I just had the opportunity to interview him on my YouTube channel called Brighter with Herbert. And wanted to have him come on here as he shares his calculations, his deep dive, his belief that the Tesla bot has a real potential to make Tesla's market cap to reach $10 trillion by 2030. He's got some special knowledge because he's been following the robot revolution, the humanoid bot revolution, for several years, even before Tesla's entry into the market. And he has some very unique contributions in terms of his positions. So we'd like to ask him a lot of questions to get him a chance to answer, folks. Your questions. If you have any, please write it in the comment area. Chris is an investor best known for growing a $20,000 brokerage account into $60 million. He doesn't use any conventional investment strategies. He was featured in Jack Schwager's book, Unknown Market Wizards, and he's considered to be one of the best performing traders in the world. He's co-host of the Dumb Money Live podcast on YouTube, found at dumbmoney.tv. So welcome, Chris. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, happy to be here.
So, Chris, our video that I did of just interviewing you has been incredibly well received by the Tesla investor community. So many comments saying that is one of the best interviews that are out there. That really appreciated you doing that. And then, funny thing was, just last night, my wife and I was watching a movie called Dumb Money, about about the GameStop situation, and you popped up there. Your face was on the screen, and I'm like, I paused it. I go, so quick, right? But it's like my wife. I know that guy. I just interviewed him. So anyway,
Yeah, I think it just got on Netflix this week. It's actually a really fun movie about the whole GameStop thing,
it,
and we actually own the trademark to Dumb Money, and they reached out to us, and we were kind of just let them use it for their movie. It seemed like a really cool movie, and in exchange, they were kind of kind to invite us and have a clip on, just randomly show up in the middle of the movie. I thought it was cool that we got to share the screen with
yeah.
McConaughey, but it was fun to see ourselves on the big screen as
No,
YouTubers.
it was absolutely incredible to see you there. But it just speaks to your position in the space. So the reason you named yourself Dumb Money is that institutional investors refer to the retail investors as dumb money, and there's a sense that the retail investors always don't know what they're doing. But your position, and many of us here on the call, is that because we study companies deeply, we're able to find and learn things about that company before anyone else does. And this is one of the things that you feel like you've discovered about the Tesla bot. Many of us in this call, we feel the same way. So why don't you start off by sharing your thinking and how you came across this?
Yeah, and a bit more just on the kind of retail investor positioning. I think it's really important. We did call ourselves Dumb Money, and that was well before the GameStop movie. We've been doing YouTube for about 6 years now, and I've always had a very strong feeling that it's a misnomer that institutional Wall Street has this huge edge on retail investors. I actually spent about 6 years growing a company in the mid 2010s called Ticker Tags. It was the first social data intelligence company that was geared towards selling data and insights to hedge funds and sell side banks. I ultimately sold that company to Jefferies Bank, but for about 4.5 years, I was in New York every couple of weeks, training the largest hedge funds and sell side banks in the world on how to interpret social data sets and how to really identify change that was happening in the world, whether it would be technological change, cultural shifts in consumer behavior in real time by analyzing contextualized data sets. Basically interpreting conversational data. And over those years, I realized really how little is behind the curtain of what we think of Wall Street being. We think that there are things happening behind the curtain that they just are privy to that us as retail investors are not. And to some extent, they do have access to data sources, transactional data and various things that give them a little bit of an edge. But in so many ways, Wall Street tends to be biased, really have a herd mentality. Um, there are just so many biases, and quite honestly, a lot of misaligned interest. They just don't really have the incentive to really be early and kind of stick their head out on new ideas, even if they believe in them. So I think us as retail investors actually do have the meaningful advantage when it comes to identifying alpha in the markets, especially when we're talking about something like humanoids, because probably one of the largest areas of opportunity for retail investors over institutional Wall Street, or when we're dealing with an anomaly, or whether you want to call it a black swan, something that really hasn't happened before, something that's really large, that doesn't have a long history of correlation, that Wall Street can look at and analyze. Wall Street generally takes a stance on those things of we'll kind of see it, we'll believe it when we see it, right, unfold. And I think a lot of the Tesla investors that are probably on this, spaces today can relate to that. If you think back, kind of the early EV days, right? Unless you were able to actually experience a Tesla firsthand, you didn't really understand just how big that movement was going to be in EV and how quickly it would accelerate, which it obviously has for Tesla. So I think that's a really important starting point for anyone that is thinking, okay, what's all this stuff with humanoids? Like, oh, come on, how are we seeing things with humanoids that quote smart money, right? How are they not seeing this? And I think that's a good really basis for that.
Thank you so much, Chris. Yeah, I appreciate that. That's a big point. So I wanted to introduce you to the Cyberbulls. This is Jeff Lutz. We got Xander Sky, Alexander Mertz. We got
Hi.
Christian Valente. We're going to have each one of us ask you a question. Also on the panel, we've got Dr. Scott Walter. I'm sure you've already seen many of my videos with him. I think we've done 30 videos on my channel. So we've evaluated almost as many humanoid bots as that's out there. And so wanted to make sure he's up, and then Søren Basher. I think you and he might have made some back and forth comments already. He's has done many business models, so we'll get him up as well. So why don't we go down the panel here? Jeff, did you want to have a question for Chris?
Yeah, I mean, first off, thanks, Chris, for joining. And thought the interview was great, Herbert and Chris. Thought you both were very articulate, and I think we can, challenge the assumptions and certain numbers back and forth. But there's a framework laid out, and I think that that's the critical part. And as we learn more about what Tesla and others are doing, you can kind of adjust and shift inside of that framework. But the output is it's pretty large. So I guess it was kind of going where you were, ending there, which is why do you think kind of the broader markets are, I don't know if the right term is sleeping on this, but you know why are they not kind of awakened to this opportunity? Be, is it kind of a lack of demonstration, or just kind of a lack of capability, or just a lack of being able to connect from like early inception to like full on implementation?
Well, I'll tell you what I think it is. I think it's a lack of. So again, remember when I just spoke about if you hadn't sat in a Tesla, if you hadn't driven one back, I don't know how mid 2000 teens, right when Tesla was brand new, you didn't really understand Tesla. You didn't really understand the concept of EV. And just how revolutionary that experience was. It's an emotional experience that goes well beyond just what you can see on paper. I'm going to make that same comparison here. Uh, Unless you have one really seen some of these early stage humanoids and seen the progress firsthand, unless you have really spent time with humanoid engineers, kind of over a period of time, not just like listening to a recent interview and you don't really know if it's fluff, right, or not. But when you've been kind of regularly talking to some of these people for years, and then seeing some of the things that they said would play out, and then seeing kind of iterations of humanoids over a period of time, you start to understand that this is real. And quite honestly, if I was a sell side analyst on Wall Street, or someone in financial journalism, like I wouldn't believe this either. I'm in a very fortunate place. I'm also an early stage investor, so about half of my time is spent analyzing publicly traded companies, and connecting the dots between shifts and change in the world and investable opportunities in public markets. And the other half is investing in private markets. I'm invested in about 120 startups directly, and a few of those startups are in the robotics space, and one of them specifically is in the humanoid space. It's one of the 8 or 9 humanoid companies that are occasionally referenced, and that I referenced in my tweet thread today on the Tesla Optimus and the $10 trillion kind of breakdown of my financial analysis. It's a company called Aptronic out of Boston, and I'll actually have the Aptronic co-founder, and CEO on our show, Dumb Money Live, here very soon, in the next week or two. But I got to meet him many years ago and got to see one of their earliest iterations of their humanoid, and got to see their humanoid take shape over the past few years, and have been completely blown away. Like I said, even before, uh, we all got to see through video footage how far Optimus has come. I was already fully bought in that this was happening, right, through my engagements with Aptronic and their engineers, and other research I've done in the space. As a result of that, um, I was able to see firsthand the realness of what's happening with the technologies involved on the hardware side of humanoids. The actuator technology, and how far that's come in the last couple of years, right? How quickly the pricing of these components have come down over the past couple of years. To see these humanoids come down from $175,000 to kind of sub $100,000 cost, and this is not scaled production, but handmade production, and to now see them rapidly approaching the $50,000 level. And again, this is not scaled production like Tesla. I'm just talking about startup humanoid companies. The cost is coming down so quickly. To see how successful these companies have been in removing components and simplifying these humanoids, the balancing, the articulation, uh, is just it's just astonishing. And it's not something that you can do as a casual observer just by watching a couple of videos, because again, you're like, okay, is it real, is it not? It's like, if you haven't been following the story, having the conversation, seeing them in person, seeing the evolution, you just don't really believe it. Additionally, there was a cycle, even in venture capital, of robotics investing that happened recently in the last 10 years, that just didn't play out that well. So there's a level of skepticism, even as it relates to kind of institutional investors in robotics, because the technology just wasn't there, right? So, when you start to see that hockey stick acceleration in hardware technology that's enabled these humanoids to kind of become what they become in the last, I'm going to say, 6 to 9 months, that's what gave me the confidence. Now, that's even before we layer on the AI breakthroughs of 2023, right? So, so when a lot of the conversations that a lot of humanoid investors and engineers have been having the past few years are, okay, the hardware is getting there. How long is it going to take us to kind of now bridge the gap? to learning certain tasks, and we were, I don't want to reveal anything that I've kind of picked up from some of the engineers that I was had privy information into kind of how these things were developing, but certainly there was very little conversation happening a year and a half ago, about kind of visual self-learning with humanoids, right? So what we've experienced in AI this past year, and to see the pivot that a lot of these humanoid companies are now taking, and obviously Tesla, towards kind of full-fledged visual learning, relying on AI, and how that could completely change the game for learning data sets, and kind of having a humanoid that doesn't just do one very simple thing, but can do lots of things in a more robust manner, because of AI. It's just completely changed the game for humanoids, if I look forward 3 to 5 years. So it's not necessarily one thing. It's the fact that it's an anomaly. It's probably too good to be true. I mean, just saying the word humanoid sounds kind of stupid, quite honestly, if you're an institutional investor, right? It just feels so dumb, right? And we've been tricked a lot the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years when it comes to technology, especially coming out of the pandemic. Even when it comes to things like blockchain, things tend to get a lot of buzz, and then they just take a lot longer to play out than anyone would have anticipated. But I sense this as
Yeah.
being very real.
Yeah. No, first, I just a quick comment on your first. I really appreciate the detailed response. And just two things that resonated with me. One is I had the same experience with Tesla. I went to test drive one in actually early 2013, and on a Saturday, and bought it. That's Model S on a Saturday. Felt the drive felt like no other combustion engine vehicle or anything I've ever driven in my life, and ended up buying the car that day, ordering it that day, and then Monday investing in the company because just how unique the experience was. And until I had experienced the vehicle and how it drove, and then did some research, I had no idea. The second thing you said that was very interesting is I'm also a kind of a startup investor, an advisor of multiple companies, and that comment you made about seeing relative progress when you're actually on the ground and working with these companies. I too, I've experienced that, and that's something you can only see when you're kind of in a unique position. But having those relative data points of improvement inform you in a way that you wouldn't get from reading stuff online or so forth. And finally, I don't know how you track 120 startup investments. I envy you and would like to understand that maybe at a different time. Thanks.
Yeah, it's abnormal, unconventional. I think for a couple of years, I was the most active early stage individual investor in the state of Texas. I've slowed down quite a bit recently, the last couple of years. I will say one other thing as it relates to why is nobody seeing this or nobody believing this? Why is nobody factoring this into Tesla valuation? And I think this is a really important point, and it has to do with Elon, and Tesla's history. So I think probably the biggest opportunity here is the fact that the history of Elon and the history of Elon making predictions, at least as it relates to full autonomous driving, that we're all well aware haven't exactly played out as anticipated over the past decade. And I think it's really easy for the market to look at that and say, well, come on. He hasn't even done that yet, right? To the degree that it was promised. And it's almost kind of ludicrous how much longer it's taken from what the promises were. So why on earth would we now believe something fantastical about a humanoid, right? Like, so if as an outsider, uh, it makes a lot of sense that you wouldn't put any credibility into the concept of having millions to tens to hundreds of millions to eventually, who knows, billions of humanoids. I mean, if Elon's saying this, like, you just have to in one ear and out the other, right? So that is actually, I think, the biggest opportunity here is the setup. I'm an investor, right? So the setup for the trade for me is fascinating because there's a really good counter argument. Well, I don't think it's a good counter argument, but there's a valid counter argument that if you're not willing to dive deep, that most people are just going to take that side of the. And I don't necessarily blame them, but that's where the opportunity is, right? So it's like, if you know, but if you don't know, you're just going, on a surface level, you're not going to believe it, because of the setup
Yeah.
of Elon and everything that's happened with autonomous driving. But one thing really does have nothing to do with the other, quite honestly. Autonomous driving is a completely different beast. Now, there's a lot of things that interconnect in terms of the AI and how it will be leveraged for the humanoid. But in terms of how good it needs to be, in terms of the regulatory, barrier, it you can't compare the two. You just can't. So, again, from an outsider's view, why would I believe this? But you just dig in a little bit and you realize that one thing has nothing to do with the other.
Nice. Okay, so Chris, many people on this call, there were Tesla investors, and we were moved first because of our, we, like you said earlier, right? We saw the EV revolution happening. We see autonomy happening, and we got involved. You actually share something along with Christian. I'll invite Christian to ask you his next question, because I'm going to out you. You actually said in my interview, you weren't really that interested in the electric vehicle. What's interesting, though, is people like you and Christian who weren't so moved by the EV revolution, but you are now with the bot, and you're coming into Tesla with the bot. So let's have Christian answer and ask you a question, and then you can speak to this.
Yeah, appreciate that. Yeah, thanks for joining, Chris. Appreciate everything you have to say. So I just want to echo a couple of things you said earlier about the retail investor having a great chance to outperform. That's what kind of Peter Lynch always talked about. We could dive in there and get in there before Wall Street and find these companies that, right when they start out have small market caps, and a lot of institutions don't want to mess with it because it just doesn't move the needle for them for the amount of money that they can put into it. So I agree with you, and I just want to echo that statement. Retail, I think, in the long term, probably does better. Not all, but could do better if you know what you're doing and you're focused on the right stuff. So I concur with that, and I agree with you. And Herbert just mentioned it. I think for me, Optimus is Tesla. Like, that's where I think all the value long term will be. I understand that FSDs there and electric vehicles, these are great things in energy. But for me, I think that the humanoid bot and what it represents as far as labor is going to be so massive that the true value of Tesla will become this product. So with that being said, I just want to know, just in general, out of your 10 trillion valuation, how much are you assigning? Because I didn't get the chance to watch the whole thing. I'll go back later and watch it. What are you assigning for out of the 10 trillion to humanoid, just in general? Like how much of Tesla will be, the valuation towards humanoid? And just high level, I heard you mention 3 to 5 years. When do you think Tesla will actually have a viable commercial product that's useful and dependable and will be able to commercialize and give to customers to buy? Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and just here, for those of y'all that haven't watched the video, or even when you do watch the interview, I really enjoyed the interview, and you want to kind of go back and look at some of the numbers. I did put a tweet thread out today, at Chris Camillo is my Twitter. It's fairly extensive, and it overviews all of the calculations and the projections and the entire thesis, in more of an abbreviated manner that you can just kind of skip through and read. So you're more than welcome to look at that. But it's 100%. So 100% of the 10 trillion is for the humanoid project. This has nothing to do with any other area of Tesla. And I know that number sounds a bit ridiculous. And I want to get back to kind of one of the fundamental pieces here, that I do not believe the market is thinking about or accounting for, or any financial analyst would even think to conduct their projections in this manner. And to be straightforward, I have not, I am not aware of Tesla uh, following this model, but I'm going to assume that they will, because I know of multiple other humanoid companies that are projecting this model, and that's that these humanoids would not be sold, but at least in the early days, in the first few years, the humanoids would be leased to industrial and commercial clients at an hourly rate. So that hourly rate would be at some discount to the all-in human rate that would be inclusive of taxes and insurance, not because they're trying to displace humans, but because these companies obviously have budgets on that hourly rate, so they would come in lower than that current hourly rate, and these humanoids would be deployed in industry sectors and job roles where there are massive job shortages. So there's already an existing demand. They don't have to create the demand, they don't have to displace workers, but the real key here and the way that you get to that valuation is because of the margin. So it's not, we're not looking at humanoids that cost $30,000 to produce that you're selling for $50,000. We're talking about, this is like humanoid as a service. So yes, the humanoids cost $30,000 to produce. Let's just say that those humanoids are amortized over a 6-year service life. That is obviously an estimate of mine. Let's now also say that the humanoids require about $5,000 of internal cost to maintain and service and to replace, various parts on the humanoid on an annual basis, yet those humanoids are being leased out on an hourly basis. So the humanoids in my projections, and I'll just pull them up here, I have them generating, give me one sec. I have them generating $94,000 in recurring annual gross revenue. That translates to $84,000 in annual operating income per humanoid. And that accounts for the amortization cost of the humanoid as well as the operating structure to service those humanoids. So that's a really big deal, right? So if you're looking at the 1.5 million humanoids that I project to be in service by the end of 2030, and that's with scaled production starting, to answer your second or third question, in 2027. So I do not believe that Optimus will be in any type of scalable production until 2027. And I could talk to that in a minute as well. Um, but you're not going to see any of these in basically scale production until that date. And I think that scale production in 2027 and 2028 will be really light. So I think the bulk of this is actually coming in 2029 and 2030. And there's a reason for that. But we're looking at about 1.5 million total humanoids in service. And with that many humanoids in service, at my estimated annual operating income, that puts you at about $141 billion in annualized revenue and $126 billion in operating income by the end of 2030. I went ahead and stuck an operating PE of 80 on that, which I think is reasonable for an industry sector that, in my opinion, will be the largest industry sector we've ever have seen in our lifetime, and it obviously being early stage with a limited number of competitors, fairly high barriers to entry, and an absolutely massive disparity between demand and supply once this is proven out. I also think because of the sexiness of this sector, I think we'll have kind of a repeat of what we saw in early days EV, but I think it's going to be a lot more interesting. Like I said, I really didn't have that big of an interest in EV. But this is something that I think is undeniable, and certainly really hard to ignore once people can kind of once people start to get on the train of understanding that these humanoids can actually execute in these various job roles. So that's 2027 is when you would see the first ones coming off the production line.
Okay. I do really want to get Omar into the conversation, but first I need to have Alexandra and Sat. They've been waiting a little bit longer. Alexandra.
Thank you very much for giving me the chance. Thanks, Chris. Loved the video you did with Herbert. Thank you for doing that. In that video, you mentioned that you think Tesla would need a 60 billion capital raise. I actually agree with that. My number was 30, but I would like to hear your reasoning for that. And then also in all your model, do you include Dojo, the supercomputer for computer vision? Is Dojo part of your conviction that Tesla will make it? Is it imperative that Dojo is a part of it, or is that not a part of your model?
So first of all, on the 60 billion, and I wouldn't, look too hard at that number. I mean, yeah, it could be 30, it could be 70 or 80. Obviously, this is very capital intensive, right? To the extent that lines will need to be created, massive amounts.
You really think so? Because I'm talking to a couple of people that are in the bot sphere, and they say, "Oh, you can go very far with 5 billion." I mean, I'm all with you because I'm obviously coming from the car side and having analyzed Tesla now over a couple of years. But do you really think it's so capital intensive?
Well, when I say not relative to automotive, no. But we're talking, if you just look at and again, that is the absolute, in my mind, that's the absolute worst case scenario, is that you would need to potentially raise 60 billion, and it's really not to really make that 1.5 million, but to really tool up and do all the things necessary to prepare for a larger tool up for kind of 2030 and beyond, right? So it's just really to set the stage here, they would, Tesla needs to really establish themselves as an industrial servicing partner for all of these use cases, right? So if they have humanoids deployed at hundreds to thousands of logistics companies and manufacturers around the world, Tesla would need to ensure not just that they can produce those humanoids, but that they are capable of actually servicing them, and all the various things that are going to go into that. It's a brand new novel space, right? We have never seen anything like this before. We don't know exactly what's entailed. So that $60 billion number, although it was drawn up as a cost of the humanoids themselves to produce them, I didn't spend that much time, right, analyzing, is it 20 billion, is it 30 billion? I was looking at what I thought would be a worst case scenario, and I felt that Tesla was one of a very small handful of companies in that space that could easily have access to that kind of a capital raise if it was necessary and not have to spend a lot of time thinking about it.
Got it. Okay.
Your second question, as it relates to Dojo and the AI side, it's not a showstopper. Listen, Tesla is obviously on the bleeding edge of AI work, and I think they have everything that they need in order to establish kind of the self-learning for their humanoid. I think the biggest issue, the biggest gap, and I discussed this a little bit today with some of the commenters on my Twitter thread. If there was one large hurdle to get over that would keep someone up at night, that should be keeping Elon up at night as it relates to Optimus, it is the learning data set. So when you think about the data set and how it's evolved with EV, we have lots and lots of humans every day training that data set. That does not exist right now for humanoids, right? So we don't have millions of humans wearing bodysuits right now today, in those manufacturing roles and those logistic roles, right? Training, a data set for these humanoids. That just does not exist today. I could think of numerous ways to create that data set, but it doesn't exist today. So we're looking at small data right now, as it relates to the specific types of learning that these humanoids will have to gain knowledge to. And that is probably the number one hurdle in terms of why we won't have these humanoids out in 2025, in my opinion, right, at production scale, because the data learning sets just aren't there yet. So the way I see this unfolding over the next 1 to 2 years there are a number of pilots happening. There are pilots that are either happening or that are on schedule to happen over the next 12 to 18 months with virtually all of the early stage humanoid companies, where these humanoids are going to be piloted at some of the world's largest companies in manufacturing and logistics. And that's where a lot of these learning data sets will be established. I would have to assume that Tesla, being Tesla, has a monstrously huge advantage there, in that they are not necessarily reliant just on outside companies for pilots. They could obviously pilot these way more aggressively internally at Tesla. And I think that they will, but it just takes time. It's going to take time. Although I think we'll see a lot of great videos this next year of humanoids doing tasks really well. I'm not so sure if we're going to get to the level of comfort where a company is going to say, "Give us 10,000, give us 50,000." Right? We're ready to ramp up our humanoid on our manufacturing lines, or we're ready to fill our warehouses with tens of thousands of humanoids. I don't see that happening until 2028, 2029. But again, the earliest starts of that, I think, will happen in 2027.
Well, yeah, I did interview Figure CEO Brett Adcock, and he did confirm that 1,000 would be the next level. And you were just talking about learning data sets. Well, that is one way that they would do it, right? I
Yes,
don't think you get
absolutely.
yeah.
So they'll be doing it at BMW, but again, it's not they're not going to be doing it over the course of
No,
a few months at BMW.
not
They'll
next
be
year.
doing it
No,
over the
no,
course of a
no.
few years.
But yeah,
So
but by 2027, you're not going to see all of a sudden 5,000, 50,000. You're going to see 1,000, and you'll probably see that sooner than you're saying, is what I'm trying to do, because of the need for learning data sets. Okay.
Correct. Yeah, I don't see Tesla pushing out hundreds of thousands of Optimus in 2027. I think the ramp up will be slow, but I think once it gets ramped up, that kind of the tail end of my projection in 2029, 2030, I will definitely be there in the hundreds and hundreds of thousands, I believe.
Okay. All right, let's get set up here.
Hi, Chris. Thank you for speaking on this subject. It's really great. There's a couple of things I wanted to discuss with you was that you're talking about also the progress and the discrepancy between the market and analysts seeing it, and you being in the startup side. Like, if you see it, like you mentioned, like 175,000 to 100,000, if you're in the midst of that progress, and if someone asks you, like, "Oh, hey, where do you think your progress is going to go?" It looks really like it's going advancing quite a bit fast. So I don't think Elon is necessarily quite like he's wrong in real time, but in the progress behind the scenes, they're making a lot of progress. It's just I think um, there's a difference between the robotics versus the AI, and I think um, the software development is much more important than the hardware. And I don't necessarily think the hardware is behind. I think it's more the software and then processing that data set that you're talking about. That's the bigger discrepancy because in the EV space, for it to be even plausible, Tesla's the only one that's actually making great profit on each unit, is because they vertically integrated. But that's a hardware issue more so than a software issue. The FSD is more of a software issue. And every time they make progress, there's a huge roadblock that nobody's ever had to deal with. So I think there's a difference in software and hardware. And like, what do you think about you're in robotics space too? Like, what do you see the difference between robotics and the Tesla Optimus bot? Because I see Boston Dynamics for a decade. They've been working on stuff. They demonstrate a lot of hardware stuff. So I don't doubt the hardware capability, but I think it's processing that software and then having a business model that can sustain it. And I don't see other companies, even if they're a startup, without massive capital infusion every few years, to be able to reach that place where they can actually market it and sell it or lease it, basically. So do you see that discrepancy?
Yes, I do, but understand that for a lot of these other startups in humanoid robotics, they only need to find success in 2 or 3 use cases, theoretically, at 2 or 3 clients, to be massively successful, right? So, it is other humanoid for a very specific task at a large global company. And they could master that one task or those 2 or 3 tasks. That is a gigantic success, and they could really go all in on deploying tens of thousands of humanoids for that specific role at that company, and that would be a huge win for those companies, right? So Tesla, in many ways, isn't even really competing with any of these other early stage humanoid companies because they just can't move quick enough. You know, from the interview that you had just mentioned with Figure, if everything goes right at Figure, they won't even be able to manufacture enough of their of their bots for a very very long time. So no one has the ability to scale up like Tesla. So Tesla is really the only player here that has the capacity to go big. So I feel that because of that, Tesla is going to try to take a more generalized approach to the software, to the AI, to actually release a bot that could do many more tasks that could potentially work with thousands of companies as opposed to a small handful of companies that would essentially take all the supply that any of these other humanoid companies would be capable of producing within that same time range of 27 to 2030, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but the one thing is, though, in terms of robotics, like there's plenty of robots that's being used today, like with single or dual tasks, like in warehouses in Japan. I've seen it in stores making food, or even in airports here making coffee, right? So there's different types of robotics
Oh, oh,
that are
oh,
already single tasked. So
oh,
what's
okay, but that's not what we're referring to. So yes, okay, so we are referring to when I'm referring to our humanoids that would be doing just a very small handful of tasks, but they're tasks that for any number of reasons cannot be done by a stationary or an arm right today with existing robotics. So even though yes it's still just doing a few tasks, it's doing tasks that you could only really do with a humanoid style robot, right? There is walking involved, there is stepping, there is some degree of having to take a step up onto a pallet, right? There's lifting, there is more differentiation in that task than what could be done today with existing robotics. So it's think of it as a bit of a hybrid, right, between the single task robots that we have on the lines today to kind of a multitask but still relatively few number of tasks that you would be doing maybe associated with the line, but off the line today. And I think Tesla is going to try to think a few steps ahead of that, of having, even for that industrial or commercialized setting, just a more generalized humanoid that where it could be more easily utilized by the full cross section of manufacturers and logistics companies as opposed to just a small handful where it's being piloted. So I believe this is a thesis, of course, but I think they're going to take a little bit of more generalized strategy in terms of the learning process on the software side.
Chris, I want to introduce you to the next 3 speakers. There's Omar from Hallmar's Catalog, you got Dr. Scott Walter, and you got Cern Basher. Omar arguably is, first of all, these 3 are, you couldn't have asked for a better panel here. Very fortunate they joined. Omar arguably is the best, finger on the pulse with what's happening with autonomy and AI that Tesla's doing with vision based AI. He can explain a little bit more of how that might transfer over to the robot. You got Dr. Scott Walter. He's a 2-time co-founder of those industrial robots you were mentioning in the past. He and I have been doing these interviews. And then Cern Basher has been doing deep dive in business models. He and I, where he will ask you some questions about some of your models shortly as well. So, Omar, Want to ask him a question or talk? Yeah.
And by the way, guys, I'm not a robotics engineer, so I would really love to hear from you guys and get your thoughts and your feedback, and to poke holes. And I'm here equally to learn as well. So love that you guys are on.
Omar, if you're there, do you want to ask a question?
I don't have any questions. No.
Okay, great. Scott, well, do you want to join in next?
Sure. Yeah, thank you, Chris, for this opportunity. I'm going to kind of follow up, I think, on where Jeff started out, and that is, with this whole idea that there's the stigma associated with talking about humanoid robots in polite society, and that all the Wall Street analysts have sort of, ignored it. And part of it might be because there's really only one company right now that you can invest in publicly. All the others are really privately held. So there aren't any opportunities out there. But still, it seemed like no one really wanted to touch that subject until last week. We got the first glimpse that it turns out, even if Wall Street isn't talking about it, evidently the CEOs of the top Fortune 100 companies are, because Brett indicated that he's had conversations with all of them, and they're all very interested. And that's a very interesting data point as far as the true interest. And we're just wondering, is that with your experience with Apptronic, are you seeing sort of the same thing?
So yes, I don't want to speak for them, obviously, but I could just certainly substantiate the fact that there is tremendous interest on the demand side. Tremendous interest. And well, I think there will likely be a lot of caution in terms of the implementation of humanoids, for safety reasons, and because it is just such a leap from traditional robotics. Because you have in a lot of these use cases, the humanoids sharing space with humans in a way that is maybe a bit less controllable than a stationary robot. And I think that is going to be the psychological rub for a lot of these decision makers to say, yes, let's deploy 10,000 of these, right? You don't want to do something, stupid, because you also know that there is political risk. There is, whether it's fair or not, whether it's real or not, there is likely to be a degree of concern from human employees that these are coming for my jobs, where it's a little bit easier to kind of not have that happen when you're talking about a stationary, robotic machine. But when you start making these robots look and walk and act and mimic human behavior, that is a delicate line to cross. It's one that we are going to cross. It's just a matter of time, but it's a delicate line to cross. And I think CEOs have to be really careful that if and when they cross that line, they're doing it in a responsible way, in a safe way. But yeah, the demand, I can assure, if there's one thing I can say confidently, the demand is there, assuming that we can get these humanoids to function in a way that the companies need them to function, and do that in a safe way. I think a lot of these pilots, and some that I'm aware of, will be done in a very careful way, to where there's not a whole lot of commingling between humans and humanoids in a small space. But that's just 1.0 of these pilots, and then we'll quickly move forward from there.
Oh, thanks. That tells us that even if Wall Street's sleeping on it, that the major corporations are not. At least they're laying the groundwork right now for that, and that's very important. But
Yeah,
I think
I would read some of the studies that have been put out the last few years on job shortages, labor shortages. This is a very real problem, right? This is not, Obviously Elon has been quoted talking about it being, the number one problem that we face as a society. You can agree or not agree with him, but certainly there are very real job shortages, and it poses itself as a material problem, and it is top of mind of any company that is in manufacturing, that is in logistics, and you could just move down from there. I own a restaurant, and we have 70 employees, and I could tell you that labor this is a small, kind of more of a hobbyist thing for me, my restaurant, but labor is always the number one concern. And that's just as an independent restaurant owner, right? Kitchen staff, uh, people to clear tables, people to do inventory, to deal with boxes as they come. Like, labor is on the minds of just about every CEO in any country around the world right now. It's a big, big problem. And, if we do start to enter this kind of, age of abundance, labor is going to become even more of a problem as people feel that there's less of a need, not only to work, but the type of job that they need to take. Do you need to take a job where you're on your feet walking 5+ miles a day on a manufacturing floor, or where you are in a weird standing position that's really impacting your physical health for 8 or 9 or 10 hours a day in logistics or in manufacturing, right? That is a very old school cultural mentality that we had for multiple generations. The new generation, they just do not, they care about health. They do not want those jobs. And I don't think that's going to change. And if you read some of these studies, what you'll see is these industries trying to reinvigorate culturally the new generation to want to take those jobs, to understand the importance of them. And I just don't have any faith that that's going to work. I think humanoids are the answer for these jobs where, having a human type individual is still required and likely will be for many decades.
One of the big points that Søren Basher, who's going to speak next year, has been making, which is even more than just the job shortage, is that this is so transformational for a customer, for a factory, for a business, that if the first mover who locks up and says, "I want 1,000 of these bots," and then meanwhile, the competitors can't get access to them for 3 5 years because of just there's not enough bots being manufactured, they could have such a significant business advantage. They can just do some real damage in the marketplace. Søren, do you want to speak to that, or any other question you might have?
Sure. Thank you, Herbert, and thank you, Chris. I just want to start off by saying, if we have a little thought experiment about a world where a manufacturing firm or any company has a choice between employing humans or deploying bots, and let's say there are no constraints. We all know what human workers are like, and if we run down the list of the benefits of bots never call in sick, they're never late for work, they never quit. They might break down, sure, you can fix that. They don't go on strike, they don't sabotage the company, they don't steal from the company, they don't take breaks, they don't fight with each other, there won't be any lawsuits from the bots. You don't have to worry about vacation schedules. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. So it's really quite remarkable to think that we're on the cusp of this type of technology. And Chris,
sorry, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I don't think I don't think you can overemphasize how top of mind that is. As someone who has been a CEO and a COO and a small business owner, it is the number one thing on your mind. Human capital. It is the toughest part of any business. And to the extent that, when you look at what I call the all-in hourly rate of human capital, you have to understand that, as most companies have to have deep benches just to ensure that they can still operate when employees are sick or when they leave, right? Or for all the employees that are underproducing, right? So in many cases, you could have double or triple the employees in certain functions because of underperforming employees. Or if every employee were capable of, producing output that is equivalent to your number one employee, which we have to assume humanoids will get to, plus some, right? Plus maybe 30, 50% on top of that. You could be looking at situations where you could have maybe one humanoid where you had two or three human employees previously. So when you look at the financial side of this, I think I had an all-in cost of these kind of initial positions ranging in the mid 20s. So let's just call it $24, $26 an hour all-in cost. And then I think I had an average hourly rate. I think it came down to about 1680 of what you'd be charging that humanoid for. Uh, Realistically, in some cases, that could be as high as 50 or 70 or $80 an hour that you're comparing your all-in equivalent productive rate, right? So, could you potentially be in a position in the early years, if demand far outweighs supply, to get 25, 30, 35, $40 an hour rates for these humanoids? I think it's definitely possible. And I could say this, nobody knows right now. There's no one with that answer. This is so novel. This is so new that it's all really speculation, which is why I think it's really important. And I tried to be as conservative as I could without trying to sound ridiculous, because it's already a ridiculous number when we're talking about a $10 trillion valuation, obviously. But I tried to be relatively conservative with all of the inputs that went into that number.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I just wanted to dive into a couple of those and just ask you about them. And one is that 1680 cost. That's a very specific number, and I was just curious as to how you arrived at that.
I think it was roughly a 30% discount to my best uh, 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 framing of what the all-in current human rate is for the jobs that were likely to be part of that 1.5 million humanoid focus, which were mostly manufacturing line and logistics warehousing jobs. So, there is no number out there on the internet that you can say, well, the number is 2550. But it felt like, from all of my research, that all-in number was somewhere in the mid 20s. And I took a 30% off that number to get to that 1680.
That's $16.80 per hour is what
That's what
the
Tesla
bot
would
would
theoretically charge.
charge per
Yeah,
for the company, which
that's an
is
all-in rate, and that includes
it's high.
servicing any type of breakage, right? So it is just, that's the all-in rate, and I do believe there has been some early conversation in the humanoid space about this, but I do believe they would likely require a minimum two shift from that humanoid. So you would have to take on the humanoid for a minimum of 16 hours. And I think the really interesting piece of that is, certainly everybody benefits if you're able to get greater capacity out of that humanoid. So if you're a client that's willing to put that humanoid to work 22 hours a day, I think there are going to be some significant discounts on an hourly rate for anything over and above 16 hours, which obviously is an inverse of how overtime work is billed today. So there's some really interesting things happening there, because we didn't talk about this yet, but I think it's worth talking about, because it came up a lot today in my tweet thread, batteries, right? And how long do the batteries last? It looks like these batteries are going to last in these humanoids between 4 and 5 hours. They should be hot swappable, so the battery will be swappable without having to reboot the humanoid. And I'm fairly confident from conversations I've had, especially by the time we get around to 2027, that either the humanoid will be able to replace its own battery, or the battery will be hot swappable with a docking station that will not require any human interaction. So if you can envision a humanoid just going up to a docking station and having its battery replaced. So these humanoids are effectively billable just under 24 hours a day.
Yeah, Chris, I think the $16.80 rate that Tesla would charge a customer, it's very important we actually get that number right, because I think that it's the most sensitive. If that number is off by $1, $2, your 10 trillion goes flying through the roof, downwards, upwards, so forth. And that's why I think it's we need to spend a lot of time on that number.
So, and I'll say this, I have, a reasonable amount of confidence, as much as you could have years before, any of these rates are set in stone. I have a reasonable amount of confidence that that rate is reasonably correct. Could it be as low as $13, $14 an hour? Yes. Could it be as high as $22, $23 an hour? Yes. But and I can't really divulge too much, but I do think that that rate is somewhat reasonable. That said, we are a long ways away from being able to determine if it's correct or not. And I think we all have to be honest with ourselves that we're just doing the best we can with these projections on something that is years away.
Agreed.
Okay. So, sir, did you have another question, or we want to? I want Xander up here, but it looks like Jeff also wants to comment.
Just a couple more things, Herbert. On the pricing, one way to do it is to do it at daily price rather than a per hour price. And if you price the bot at $16.80 an hour for 16 hours, you get to $269 a day. And of course, if the customer uses it for more than 16 hours, then they're getting a discount on that. That would be another way for Tesla to do it. It's interesting. These models are so attractive that I run my model at $40 a day, and it's still a massive moneymaker for Tesla. But Chris, I'm curious as to why you feel that Tesla would need to cover the maintenance costs. Why that would be included in that daily rate? It seems to me that some users of the bot might have more wear and tear on the bot than other users. And so,
okay, great question.
Seems like Tesla might want them to pay those extra costs.
Okay, let me answer that. First of all, when you think about how much Tesla would charge and how they would charge, it makes the most amount of sense that you would look at what an industry is currently paying for their labor, and you would want to bill them in the most similar fashion. So if you have an industry that has, if you have a company that has 7,000 employees and they're paying $26 an hour for these employees to do task, number one, and that's what they do. I spent my entire career in sales, right? So, and kind of structuring these sorts of plans for companies. You would want to go in, and the path of least resistance is to say, we can accomplish that same exact job at half that rate or 2/3 of that rate, right? Whatever the number is. It's the easiest way to get to a yes. There's no reason to really play around with other models of, well, we'll sell you the robot and you figure it out, or we'll charge you for the day and you figure it out. You just say, listen, we're gonna do the same exact job. We're gonna do it cheaper and better. It's just the most sensible way to think about a pricing strategy. And I would have to imagine that the majority of humanoid companies, when they're in a room trying to figure this out, and I've had these conversations, with humanoid decision makers as well. This is where you're going to end up. Now, maybe I'm wrong, but I believe it's where they're going to end up because it's the most sensible and it is the most profitable for the humanoid company. And there's no reason to charge less. There's no reason to charge $40 a day. There's no reason to, allow a company to have a humanoid to do a job for $3 an hour that they're paying $26 an hour for. That's nonsensical. No company would offer that unless there's another company willing to give it for $4 an hour, which there won't be. Why would you charge them anything less than maybe a few bucks less than what they're currently paying, because maybe there's a little bit of risk? But you have to remember, we're not displacing jobs. right? So you could make a case that if they're paying $26 an hour for human capital and they're short 20,000 jobs, that they would pay $35 an hour for humanoids because they just need the production. They're not looking to save money. They're just looking for labor. So I would, in my mind, being ultra conservative by taking 30% off the all-in rate when you might be able to make a case that they would pay 10 or 15 or 20% over the all-in rate because they're desperate for labor, whether it's a human labor or non-human labor. So, that's how I came up with it. And I believe it is a really important question. But at the end of the day, all of these humanoid companies and Tesla, they're going to sit in a room and they're going to have the same conversation and they're going to debate it. And what is going to be the result of that debate? I would put my money on the fact that they will have an all-in hourly rate, and it will be something close to what companies are currently paying, whether it's a little more or a little less for human capital. I think you asked another question. There's another part to your question. Oh, why would Tesla pay for servicing? Well, it's really simple. Tesla knows more about their bot. We're talking about humanoids. Again, this is a novel technology. It's intimidating for any company to start employing humanoids. They know nothing about humanoids. They know nothing about actuators. They don't know if these things are going to fall apart in 2 weeks or if they're fine for 3 years. They don't have a clue. And you do not want to put that on your client. There's zero reason. We're not talking about cars here, right? Like we all know that the average car lasts this long. 4-year warranty is what we've been doing for 70 years. We're all comfortable with that. It's 4 tires and wheels and a steering wheel and an EV, an electrical engine versus a gas engine, right? But this is a brand new novel tech, and you do not want to put that on your client. I think there is enough of a margin. There's an incredible margin here. I think it's like upwards of 90+% operating margin on these humanoids as a service that you will see Tesla take on the servicing and the warranty and the breakage because there's plenty to go around. Again, if you look at my $5,000 estimate on an annualized basis, these are humanoids that would be generating, on my calculation, $94,000 a year, right? With $5,000 a year amortization on a 6-year lifespan, on a $30,000 cost per humanoid, you throw in another $5,000 in servicing and maintenance, like it's a round off error. It's a complete round off error. So you don't want to throw that onto your client, at least not in the first 3 to 5 years.
Those are both really strong points, Chris. Thank you.
Okay, can I just have a quick pause here? Folks, if you're enjoying this conversation, please follow the speakers on the panel. Follow Chris Camillo. He's on Dumb Money TV. He's got his X account. Follow Cyberbulls. We do this every week, and we're going to be inviting big guests, just like we have with Chris today. So thank you, everybody. And then share this in DM or in X to get more people to join in. Go ahead, Jeff.
Oh, before Jeff, on that note, if I could ask everyone, education is just so critically important. We all know that. Like, I know the Tesla fan base talks about this all the time. It's educating the world. We have to educate them on EVs, right? The same exact thing goes here for humanoids. I worked on that tweet thread that I put out today for about a week before I issued it. So, if if everyone here wouldn't mind going to my Twitter, I tweeted that this morning. It's a 15-part tweet thread on the Optimus, on why we need the Optimus, on why this is good for civilization, not bad, why this is good for workers, not bad, exactly how it's going to play out, how it plays out for Tesla investors. If everybody wouldn't mind, kind of, if you have a Twitter account, retweeting, obviously everyone here does, an X account, retweeting that thread, I think it would go a long way towards kind of educating the world on this being a positive thing and how Tesla stands to benefit.
Okay. Thank you, Alexandra. A little late.
Pin to the top of the speech for your
I did it earlier this morning. Okay, go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, I love the past discussion. So this this is my part of my day job. I teach tech companies and on design for costs and really product cost structures, both in design and manufacturing, and like, go very deep into this conversation about what is actual labor and labor rates. And I'm not going to get overly wonky on this call, but I think there's a couple of things that could potentially be overlooked that that folks in the space may want to consider. One is around the impact on ramp curves and what this does in terms of getting to peak volume with labor. Uh, Bots theoretically aren't going to have the kind of training curve that a human would have doing the same task. And the way companies measure labor rate, they look at what they pay. Like in Asia, they're looking at the 350 an hour that they're paying for labor, but they really measure it in terms of labor efficiency. So if my station's running at 25% efficiency, that person actually cost me $14 an hour to get one widget out. And that's, I think when you pull the covers off of that and you realize the efficiency and the performance, and remember productivity, there's an element of productivity that's around quality, which is, did they actually output something from the station that is usable for the next station? And theoretically, the rate of that is going to go up very high as well. And these are the things that these companies look at and they value. So this conversation around, is it $16 an hour? How many? By the way, at least in Asia, I mean, if you're using 16 hours as a baseline, that is on the low end. That's what the contract manufacturers will try to put in front of you. But what they actually run their labor at is something closer to 20 to 22 hours per day. And that's where really the foundation of a lot of the calculations are, to do some of these mega deals for production on product. But I just wanted to say this whole concept of a ramp curve completely changes, I believe, with humanoids. Is there going to be, like, you don't just put on the line and turn it on and it's at peak rated speed instantly, but theoretically, from the time it takes, well, this is one of the things that really, that companies, like the biggest companies in the world, they struggle with, which is, how long is my product schedule and how much shorter could it be if I could actually ramp faster? And then what does that mean in terms of gross margin dollars per day for my product line if I have product availability sooner? And that one single day of product availability could, I mean, completely wipe out, and completely transform a business case in many cases. So I just want to talk on a couple of those different things about, like labor efficiency versus the static rate of human labor. And the way that companies look at it, they're really looking at the efficiency of that labor and what is their output versus, I would say putting in a human in there. The other thing about service plans, I think you're spot on. This is one of the things in the fixed robotics industry and just all the capital that's used in factories. This is where contract manufacturers and providers of this capital make a tremendous amount of money, is on the service plans. And nobody's going to know this data better than Tesla. So it would behoove them to own the whole service aspect of it. And finally, I think the negotiation side of this is going to be fascinating, because Tesla's going to be able to walk into these conversations and their bots are going to be able to report back on them of, like, how fast am I actually doing these operations? What is my productivity? What was my productivity a month ago versus now? And they're actually going to have all that information in front of them, and they're going to be armed to the teeth with this information that says, I've transformed your business and taken this much amount of cost out. Let's revenue share and some of that. So I think the possibilities here are endless, and just don't underestimate what this does to ramp and productivity efficiency curves and factors.
Yeah, that's a great comment. And also, let me add to that. When you start to think about the amount of cost that's baked into middle management, into HR, right, at each and every one of these facilities, the when I use the word all-in cost, and it's really simplified, but the reality is the all-in cost could be meaningfully higher if we look at it per position in a humanoid world, where we can start to remove a lot of the elements that we have in place today, because humans are humans and we need to have them in place. And I'll just give you one really fun use case, and I've kind of had this conversation with one of the humanoid companies because I was just curious if I was being realistic or not, and if I could have a humanoid in my restaurant, right, doing these certain tasks. And I was told that absolutely within 5 years I can have this. So I'll just kind of lay this out for you guys. I have 70 employees in my restaurant. And when I think about what I would be willing to pay for a humanoid uh, to be, and we're not open for lunch except for weekends, but to be preparing food in the hours up to the time the restaurant opens, to do all the food prep, to obviously be on the line with other humans, actually cooking the food. But then when the restaurant closes down, I have to pay I think 3 or 4 of my kitchen staff for 2 hours to just clean the kitchen. All work that could be done by the humanoid. These are things that cannot be done by machines. They have to be done by humans or humanoid type figures. To clean the kitchen. I often then have a security guard that we will get on some nights late at night on weekends because we have a lot of theft in our area. It would theoretically take the role of, kind of a walking camera security guard that can communicate and transmit video to us. But then we have about 7 or 8 hours of work when the restaurant opens in the morning. We get about 150 boxes of food that needs to be, unboxed, taken to the refrigerators, right? We have refrigerators behind our restaurant. We have a walk-in fridge in our restaurant. The amount of prep time that goes into that, I can easily employ that humanoid almost 24 hours a day. And I think I would probably like to do that with 2 or 3. So there are 15 million restaurants, at least globally. Having that would just be an absolute game changer. And this is as a small business owner, right? So we're taking a huge leap there, all right? Because no small business owner is going to have the ability to even acquire one of these humanoids because the demand curve won't allow for it, right? We just won't have enough supply for many, many years after this hits production. But it's really staggering when you start to think of the use cases and just how far the long tail of demand goes for these humanoids, even beyond what we think of as critical jobs in for industrial logistics uses that make the world's economy go round.
Chris, could you tell us again the name of the other bot company you're investing in? Didn't catch it first time.
Yes. So currently, I've been an investor in a company called Apptronic. They are out of Austin. They are probably one of the least capitalized companies in the space, even though they've been evolving their humanoid, and it's mind-blowingly incredible over the past 7 or 8 years. I want to say that they've raised 15 million in capital thus far, and that's kind of where they are.
Thank you.
Okay, let's get set up.
Yeah, so one thing that you guys are talking about in terms of hourly wage, I get why it would be comparative to a factory worker or a human's wage, but I see the humanoid to be able to do more, and there's massive depopulation, especially in the rural areas in Japan, and they need more people. Like the earthquake that happened on January 1st, there's decimation in the city in that peninsula area, and the biggest problem is that they can't even get the infrastructure getting back up. So I would think that they would pay even more, way more, because what's the cost of the infrastructure being down for so long? And the danger that they had even for rescue workers to even just go and spot a human, just to even scan and to look at it was dangerous because of the aftershock. And then it snowed 2 days later, and then there's the mudslide. So even just to shovel out dirt, it's like dangerous for humans to do it. So there's jobs even for checking if there's the pipelines were leaking or not. There were 2 people, and the guy said they needed 12, and that's a small town. So it's not even about replacing humans. There's like jobs that humans can't do, and they need more humans of. So I think if a humanoid could go into a building and spot a human, and then not you don't have to worry about the aftershock, the price for a humanoid I think would be much more valuable than $22 an hour.
Yeah, I have a map on one of the tweets in my tweet thread today, which is the human deficit by country in the world. And I just kind of looked at on the map of Japan, and they're red, they're acute deficit, meaning that they're in need of 12 to 18 million additional workers by 2030. So yeah, that's 12 to 18 million needed just in Japan by 2030.
Okay, fantastic. Xander, did you want to talk? Because you own 5 frozen yogurt shops as well.
Four. First of all, Chris, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your thoughts and doing the Herbert video. It's really nice to see the finance world starting to put some numbers down on paper. And as Herbert said, I own some furrier shops, and labor is my number one cog. The tasks involved. You just made me very sad with that. Small business owners not being able to get the bot anytime reasonably soon. But my tasks are like 15-year-old kids can do it. All I need is good decision makers that can prioritize tasks. Things like cleaning, pouring yogurt, cutting fruit. The other challenge with the labor is being lumped in with the living wage crowd. Most of my workforce is anywhere from 16 to like 22 or something, and they live at home and go to school. So that's caused serious margin erosion. We've gone from a target of like 20% down to under 10 in EBITDA, and that is makes it that the risk isn't worth the reward. So I can't scale. I don't want to scale. So I think ultimately the consumer will benefit from humanoid bots. I know there's a lot of fear, but I really enjoy your thread. I didn't finish it yet, but I thank you for doing that. My question to you is a one that everyone in the crowd probably expects me to ask, and that is what do you think that Tesla has to display to the market to receive like a sector upgrade, whether it be an AI company, a robotics company? What is it? And how long do we have to wait to 2027 or
No,
26? If
no,
you could
no.
speculate.
But by the way, I have to tell you one thing I think is really critical. You just said you don't want to scale. I have had a handful of opportunities the past few years to get into other restaurant projects where we have spent tens of thousands of dollars in design and architecture, and each and every time when we had to make that final decision to go in on the restaurant concept or not, we decided against it. And the reason was my partner and I just didn't want to take that step with labor. We were concerned about our ability, the headache of managing another 60 or 70 employees for a restaurant concept. And that's, in a city where we have lots of labor here in Texas. So it's always it has stopped us from expanding our business because of the labor shortage, just as a small, and to hear you say that about your yogurt shops, guys, this is on the mind of every single business owner. It prevents us from expanding. It prevents us from taking risk. It would be so different if we had access, if we had the labor problem solved. It would be so different. And for me personally, I'm actually trying to invest in some other private humanoid companies right now because my goal is to, come hell or high water, I want a humanoid when they're available in my restaurant. I want to be the learning data set for restaurant work. Um, and so hopefully that will happen. But back to your question, what do we need to see for investors? It's a great question. I have so much confidence, and I'm not a financial advisor, so this is for me and my portfolio. I have so much confidence it's going to happen, and I think it's going to happen in the next 12 months. I don't think it's any one thing. I think it's numerous things. I think it's a lot of it are going to be videos from not just Tesla, not just Optimus, but from all of the humanoid companies. Videos, tweets, updates on what is happening from educational institutions. I mean, I had a video sent to me this morning on another humanoid out at Berkeley. I think just propagating this stuff over and over and over again and normalizing it to where it starts to grab the attention of media, financial media, of sell-side banks, of buy-side funds, to where everyone's talking about it, and then the money will just start to flow. I mean, the fact that, it's me, a retail investor, it's not Kathy Wood, right? So it's me, a retail investor, having to kind of put out some of the first, financial projections on Optimus is quite ridiculous. I don't think we'll have that issue 12 to 18 months from now. I think it will take more videos from Tesla. It will take more conversation. It's going to be a lot of things, and it will be slow at first, and then all at once. I think we're going to have that moment. In that moment where everyone's focused on it, and the FOMO will start to settle in. There's no doubt in my mind that at some point the FOMO is going to settle in when you see enough reports, and it's not just successful retail investor with a $10 trillion projection, but it's JP Morgan, or Wells Fargo, or some other research shop putting out an estimate of what the humanoid industry as a whole can look like in 2030, and or what Tesla Optimus could look like. That is inevitable. I think it's like in the next 6 to 18 months. It would be my time frame.
Yeah.
I did not think we would have this much humanoid buzz in January of 24. I said this on our YouTube interview. Half of me is really upset right now that these conversations are happening today, that the space is happening today, because selfishly, I was hoping to kind of push forward a couple quarters, because I think there are a lot of questions around Tesla right now. There are some concerns, obviously, around Elon, and will he or will he not need to sell more stock to support his Twitter position. I was hoping, again, this is all selfishly, I was hoping for a bigger shakeout in Tesla to provide kind of a buying window. But it's happening now, and I don't know if any of it's translating into Tesla stock. Certainly not yet, but we'll see over the next 1 to 6 months if any of that starts to happen. I am only partially invested in Tesla. I have a long-standing Tesla position. I think is like 4 to 5% of my portfolio. And I was planning on raising that to 20 to 30% of my portfolio, solely based on Optimus alone. I was hoping to not have to do that now, but I might, sooner than later.
Yeah, we should mention that CERN, Scott and I have actually been contacted a few times now by different entities like investment analysts to help them kind of analyze this market and for them to start thinking about it. The other thing we're doing is we're creating a think tank for bot regulation, bot laws, compliance, and anything that just impact the bots of society. So if anybody wants to have questions about that or help us develop this, please reach out to us. Chris, yeah, we've turned you into a Tesla bull. I just do love it that there's people like you coming in now because of the bot. I mean, despite the Tesla being an EV company, an energy behemoth, you still weren't necessarily, I mean, you said you have 4 to 5% long standing, so you did bet into it, but now you are, becoming more confident in terms of that investment. So
that 4 to 5% only happened, I don't know, maybe about a year ago because of Optimus. So even before the threshold. So
Okay.
now I've always been kind of a 1 to 2% Tesla guy, but the 4 to 5% was Optimus, early Optimus driven.
Dude, you've got a long way to go, buddy. Do you know the audience, right? You understand who the audience is?
Yeah, no, believe me, I'm. Well, we have a lot of Tesla bulls in the Dumb Money TV community as well, so it's not foreign to me. I've just kind of taken a different path over the years, and for me, timing is incredibly important too. So, even if one believes in something, it's opportunity cost of having a dollar sit over here where it could be making money over here. And I average, for those of y'all that aren't totally familiar with me, I'm going on, I think, 16 years now of 65% annualized returns annually on my portfolio. So opportunity cost is a really important piece of my investment strategy. So it's about timing the information arb window of when others will become aware of something that you believed in that you thought the market was not fully appreciating for some period of time. So I don't want to leave too much time. I don't want the money sitting there until the market realizes it.
Powerful, powerful. Okay, let me open it up to the panel here. Anybody who's a speaker here, do you want to ask a question or want to add a comment? Feel free to raise your hand or just go ahead and jump in.
Chris, if I could ask you about this notion of the need for bot minders or bot shepherds, right? So if you get a bot, out of the box, or the bot walks into your restaurant, I would imagine that there would be a human that would be needed to oversee, a number of bots. And I'm just curious as to what your thoughts are, sort of around that concept.
Well, certainly during piloting, and then beyond piloting, certainly there would need to be human supervision, just as there's human supervision, right? That said, I think the concept of having a bot supervision, it feels to me like a much lower wage position relative to having middle management. Making six figures over human employees. So it's not a concern for me when I think about cost structure for companies. Simply looking the same way that you have someone looking over machinery at a factory, right? I don't see it being any different than that, honestly. Once we get through piloting stage, of course. While we're in piloting stage, we still have issues with bots falling over, right? These bots have weight to them. So we don't want the bot falling over, injuring a human, or not injuring, but potentially harming some other piece of equipment in the factory. So early on, you're going to see a lot of that. But once we get through piloting and these are in production and in motion, I don't think it's that much different than any other type of individual responsible for machinery or equipment.
And then on the maintenance side, bots, I would imagine, would need regular maintenance, and then of course, if something breaks, they need to be fixed immediately. Do you see Tesla placing Tesla employees in factories to handle that, since Tesla is covering that cost?
I don't know. I haven't gone that far down the rabbit hole, and I'm not even sure if anyone at any of the humanoid companies or even Tesla has either. I think in the early days, maybe in the early days, long term, I don't think that's necessary. I would imagine you'd have an individual at the client company who is trained up by Tesla and has a direct line of communication to Tesla. But at the end of the day, you have to remember these are just pieces of equipment. Something breaks, you throw it in a box and you ship it back, right? So, it's not it's not that deep. As my 13-year-old son tells me all the time, I think it's not that deep.
Yep. Thank you.
Do the new speakers have a question? Go ahead and raise your hand and go for it.
Yeah, unmute and speak, please.
Yeah, hi guys. So hi Chris. Good points on the education side. I just heard that you mentioned that education and awareness is going to be super critical. My question to you is: I talked to you. So I started this company recently, Tesme.com, and what we do is we provide learning experiences so that FSD adoption and the awareness of FSD, how to use it safely and stuff like that. So experienced Tesla owners can provide that. My question to you is how important would be for Optimus as well for personal or let's say commercial usage for something like this where people can provide just like a personal consumer how to basically use the bot and then provision it or things like that. Thank you.
So it sounds like you're more focused on the home. That question would be pertinent when we get into home bots, right? Which outside of myself having some fun every once in a while, thinking about all the things I would have a bot do in my home, which the length of that list has gotten really long. I haven't really allowed my head to get into home bot usage because I just don't. I know there's at least one bot company in Europe that's exclusively focused on that, but I just don't think it's a big part of the 27 to 2030 story. So I'm probably not the best person to answer that because I've been laser focused on industrial and commercial applications and financials and what would be involved in getting those bots to market as an investor, at least, right? And as soon as you go to the consumer side, it just kind of opens up a can of worms that might be small and might be big, but my brain hasn't spent a lot of time there.
Yeah. So,
Sorry, I could.
yeah, that's a great point, Chris. No, so like even for commercial perspective, there's a lot of more.
Uh-oh.
Okay. Anybody else have a question? We can bring up the next person. Okay, we got Millen Bear.
Hello.
Hello.
Hey, it's Millen. How are you?
Good.
Good. Yeah, thanks for letting me up. I was just wanting to share a few numbers that I've been working on for the bot, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so my strong opinion is that, hope/opinion is that Tesla will probably release the bots in a similar way to the cars and try to limit the amount of companies owning hundreds or thousands of them at a time. So all my numbers are around the monthly subscription you would pay as an individual to keep the bot running, and then it would be up to you as the individual whether you contract that bot to a company or use it in the home. And yeah, with the numbers I work from, it seems pretty evident to me that the valuation of Tesla just based on those subscriptions can get to well over 50 trillion in the next decade and a half, based on as little as a 200 as little as a 20 million bot fleet at around $4,000 or $5,000 per month. And I feel that anyone sort of modelling those figures should be just, in my opinion, ignoring the hourly wage and just looking at what is a bot going to generate, what is a bot subscription value per month, and just multiply fleet size by value by months. And I think that's a very simple way to get to a valuation which is going to meaningfully reflect where we see things in a decade or so.
Yeah, so if I can counter that a little bit, not saying that isn't theoretically possible, but I think any time that we start to get into, like, let's look at numbers today. Our top largest companies in the world are in the $1 to $2 trillion range, right? So anytime that we get to kind of a factor that's meaningfully larger than that, and certainly when we start to talk about 40, 50 trillion dollars plus, we're bringing in variables that are hard to assess, meaning at that point the profit to gain is so large in that scenario that it's really hard to determine what competition both looks like and what competition is willing to do from an acceleration standpoint to kind of help commoditize and bring down margins and operating margins and to that world. So I think we have to be careful not thinking too big, because once you think too big, it changes the game, right? So I feel that $10 trillion number that I threw out there was valid based on the barriers to entry in that 2027 to 2030 timeline of how quickly other companies could or could not enter the space and start to scale up to the degree that Tesla, with their manufacturing expertise, would already be scaling in that space. But I think at some point the financial market is going to cap how they would value a company based on future earnings because of an assumption that something else would happen to kind of prevent them from getting that meaningfully larger than any sort of realistic valuation that we would be at today. I think it's going to be, there's a ceiling there, right? Because of what we don't know. I hope that, I know that was a odd way for me to answer that question, but I think we have to be careful because yes, on paper you could make a case for 50 trillion when you start talking about home bots and what people would be willing to pay for them. But what does the world look like in that situation? Who else is in the game at that point?
So I agree, especially on like the gross valuation of the opportunity. But when you're going into a business and you're trying to sell in the valuation of the bot, I do agree with the speaker of wage is really only a small component of it. You really need to understand the value of the company, and one of the better ways to do that is to kind of have some application specific people on your team that actually understand the end-to-end cost structure of the business you're going into and making a proposal. So it's, for example, if it's making a consumer electronics device, one of the very small aspects is the actual labor rate. There's so many other large aspects around scrap rate, around productivity, around labor capital efficiency. So I think it's really important. Like we're selling this into a particular opportunity, is really understanding the value to that client. It just goes well beyond wages. But I agree, you got to start somewhere, and you don't want to sound ridiculous either.
Yeah, and I think that's quite honestly one of the areas where I have a little bit of concern around Tesla and Elon, because you really have to that's extending into a whole nother line of business that Elon just has not proved his kind of leadership managerial expertise to excel in, right? In terms of selling B2B in that manner and servicing B2B and the standards that's required to be a leader in that space. I think that that is an area of concern for me, and I in the back of my head I've said this multiple times. My dream would be for Elon to hire a Tim Cook individual that can spearhead that for the next decade at Tesla,
Okay.
especially as they start to get into humanoid robotics.
Completely disagree with you, Chris. Gotta step up here, man. Elon is probably the best person in this entire world to strike partnerships with corporations, with nations. If you're talking about a B2B business, I mean, he's proven that he can manage business on a strategic level, on a tactical level. By the way, I'm not an Elon acolyte or anything like that. Okay, I'm just saying that you're referring to his business skills. This is
No, not his business skills. It's not his business skills. He's thinking on a higher level, right? He's thinking on the same level that a Steve Jobs would have thought at, and it's just a completely different listen, I have I have numerous friends, most who are big Tesla, love Tesla, have owned Teslas from the first day on, and they all have the same complaint to me. They're just, the last couple of years especially, they've been getting exceptionally frustrated with the back end communication, corporate communication, servicing for clients, for customers of Tesla. And as they start to scale out, just having an emphasis on that part of the business, that part of the business is actually equally to more important than the creation part of the business. And I have never seen or heard of an individual that was able to really emphasize and excel in that fashion on both sides. It's hard, and it's fortunate for Apple to have had, and for Steve to have had Tim Cook, and for him to empower him in the way that he did, even while Steve was still around.
Yeah,
And
gotta interrupt again.
I think it's really
Chris.
important.
Yeah, but Elon walks the line of the factory. He knows every single step. He's better than Tim Cook.
This is not about the factory. This is not about building. Okay, this is not about creation. Yeah, I agree with you. Believe me, I 1000% agree with you in everything you're saying. But that's not what this is about. This is about the really boring, monotonous stuff that is not remotely interesting. Okay, this is the type of stuff that if anyone who knows Elon wants nothing to do with, and he shouldn't want anything to do with it. There should not be one person who should want Elon to spend any time doing anything that I'm discussing right now. But he needs to really focus on empowering really strong, prominent leaders in that space and giving them as much resources as required to take equal amounts of risk with that side of the business as he does on the creation side. So I think that's the difference here.
Chris, I
Agreed.
would suggest that maybe SpaceX was kind of the model for that. But just back to the question earlier about, you know, when the market gets big, your model is looking at 1.5 million bots, and you get to a $10 trillion valuation on the back of that. You know, Elon has said that bots, there could be, you know, by 2040, you know, a billion bots in the world. And so right now, as you look at it, the competition for bots is human labor and the cost of human labor, right? And as you've pointed out, that some companies may be willing to pay even more than the cost of human labor because of the reliability of bots, and they don't quit and all that stuff. And until there's enough bots in the world where the next best alternative is more attractive, then, you know, it's a pretty solid market. And how many bots in the world do we need until competitive forces start to take over? Until the, you know, cheap Chinese bots become a major force in the market. It seems to me the market's going to be supply constrained for a couple of decades, just maybe 15 years. You know, we might be surprised at how strong pricing is for a long time.
I would not disagree with any of that. I also don't disagree with Elon's if you had to hold me to a projection, you said, Chris, where are we going to be in 2040? How many humanoids will we have? I would my bet would probably start with 1 billion, and it'd be somewhere north of 1 billion. That said, as an investor, I don't. It doesn't add anything to my analysis to think beyond 2030, because I just know that in 2024, which is where we are today, Wall Street is not going to give any value to that. They're just not going to. They're not going to buy it. They're not going to care about it. They're not going to assess it. And it's too speculative. And it doesn't matter in my world, right? So my head is not allowing myself to go there. But if you forced me, I would say Elon is absolutely correct. And we're talking about over 1 billion bots by 2040. I don't see how we don't get there. But how do we get there? You know, what does it look like? Pricing power. I think if you ask me, like, you have to put a price on what people are charging for bots in 2030. What's the hourly rate? Assuming that we go down that hourly rate road, I'm going to say $30 to $40 an hour. I can't put $30 to $40 an hour as my projection because I just know that Wall Street's not going to do that. And they're not going to ever place that value until it actually happens. So because they're not going to place that value, I'm not going to think of that value because it won't convert to projections. It just won't. Even if you can make a case for it, it actually makes the overriding case of the projections less impactful. So, you know, I think that $10 trillion number is about as high as you can, as high as Wall Street or even the retail investing public is going to allow the speculation 5 years out to get. on the humanoid space for any individual company, even Tesla. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It's, an interesting challenge because 1.5 million bots in service relative to a billion opportunity, which that may be even higher than that, but let's just use a billion. That's only 0.15% of the market. Right, 15 basis points of the market that's been deployed at that point. Right, and so that's a $10 trillion valuation by your model. So, at 30 basis points of market saturation, you're at a 20 billion valuation. 20 trillion.
Yes,
sorry.
but again, remember, it's a novel sector, and there are many unknowns, even if they're perceived unknowns, even if those in the know don't believe they're unknowns, there will be many perceived unknowns, meaning that it will be difficult. And I don't think Tesla is working with thousands of B2B clients in 2030. I think they're working with a relatively limited number. It could be dozens to hundreds of industrial and commercial clients with those 1.5 million bots. So, because again, each one of them still needs to be trained up, educated up. There's a process here for a novel technology that you have to account for. Things just move slower than you anticipate because it's new. So, guys, I'm so sorry. I'm actually running really late for a dinner.
Yeah.
And I have to hop off, but I will say that this has been unbelievably fun to be part of. I'm so appreciative that you invited me to be on the spaces. And as things evolve, I would love to join you guys again whenever you'd like to have me. I super appreciate it. But I have to sprint out of my house right now for dinner.
No, go ahead and do that. Thank you so much.
Bon appetit.
Follow him at dumbmoney.tv. And this is the Cyberbulls. We'll do this every Tuesday at 3:00, and we also have our Friday shows. Thank you, everybody on the panel. Appreciate everybody. I've created a website that is the most comprehensive resource for the Tesla investor. Please check it out. Simply go to my website at herbertong.com.